Hello, 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 and welcome to another edition of Talent Talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, what would all of you like more of? Quality, quality, quality.
Go back, but they're also starting to, invest and innovate and grow.
That's where we should really be focusing instead of the bright and shiny.
Hello, 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 and welcome to another edition of Talent Talks. Today, I have my partner in crime, my work husband. You can call him many things. Most people in the industry call him Dan. Dan, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience in case they haven't seen one of our previous casts?
Sure. Hey, everybody, Dan Sapir. I've been in the HR tech space for about 10 years. Here at Joveo, I'm the general manager of the Americas, and I also lead our publisher side of the business.
He's being very humble. He does a little bit of everything. And, at every company, there's sort of that person that you phone a friend to. Dan is everyone's phone a friend, which makes him the perfect guest to talk about a really incredible topic. And that is the state of today's job market. So, Dan, you did a blog not too long ago that talked a little bit about how things were shifting in 2021. Before I get into that, let me just say, I cannot find a single person on my socials that are not like, there's jobs for $15 an hour.
Yeah.
Like, why, this is a great job. People don't want to work. Like, can you give us a little bit about your perspective on that and kind of what the market's actually doing?
I mean, I hear that stuff nonstop, right? Like, I know people that run call centers who, when the stimulus checks first started coming out, said, people show up and the next day quit because it was more lucrative for them not to have a job. Actually, my father-in-law, he runs a pet toy company, and he's trying to find people for his assembly lines, and he deals with the same thing. So, there's a few different things that are going on at the same time. I actually like to go back before 2021. The normal kind of baseline that I always saw was right around 6.5 million open jobs at any given time, right? And then COVID hits, and all of a sudden that basically goes to half, plummets. No one wants a job. No one can find a job, right? It's just not existent, right? As we normally see it. And then stimulus checks start hitting, and then everyone's kind of comfortable sitting at home and waiting it out. Jobs started kind of coming back around that time. And for our clients that were like, what's going on? I'd like to call it job seeker window shopping, right? They'd click on stuff, but they weren't really applying, right? And then when stimulus checks started kind of running out, and this is right around like November, December, January, people weren't sure what's happening. And, COVID things are kind of, restrictions are being lifted a bit. So job seekers are kind of coming back, and jobs are coming way, way back at this point, right? And then, of course, another stimulus check hits around mid-March, and all of a sudden, there's fewer people getting hired than ever. And remember when I said there's normally about 6.5 million jobs? I think it was March or April, there was 8.1 million open jobs open. And then this past month, there was well over 9 million. So like you have a ton of companies looking for job seekers, and then you have fewer job seekers actually getting hired because for a number of different reasons, they're more complacent in certain jobs, and in others they can make a decent amount just not having a job at the moment. It really depends on the specific vertical. So like when we're dealing with like warehouse positions, those have become incredibly difficult. Trucking has become very difficult. And of course, trucking has always been difficult, but it's like way, way harder than ever before. And then finally, like you have even like nursing and healthcare and other areas that haven't really struggled in the way they have today are just like seeing this massive, massive gap. So it's really interesting. It's something we haven't really seen before.
And I've been on the other side of the fence, right? I've been the talent acquisition professional looking to hire those people. And in previous markets, it sort of seemed like you had some geographic misalignment. Like like the Bay Area, like you couldn't hire anything or anybody in the Bay Area for a long time. And now it seems like regardless of location, and some industries are hit harder than others, but there's really just sort of this general apathy of job seekers, right? Like what is it? I saw the stat somewhere. The average number of clicks per job is reduced by 40% in the last 6 months, something along those lines. I mean, think about that. You have to try almost twice as hard to get the same amount of people. I mean,
yeah, it's interesting because I mean, once again, I think it depends on the vertical. But I think a lot of the jobs that are open right now are not what I would consider necessarily the most interesting job to your average job seeker, right? So like people that are really hiring a ton tend to be in logistics and operations and things like that. And I mean, you could be the greatest company in the world, but if you're in a segment that doesn't either pay well or for other reasons, is taxing on your body or something like that, I mean, it really makes it difficult to hire for those positions and just so much more than before. Whereas, in historical times, people needed jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And at this point, the jobs that are open, there's a bit of this, like, I can take it or leave it. Like, even if it's a few bucks more an hour than, sitting at home and, my overall, stimulus paycheck plus unemployment versus that, like, there's a lot of apathy for getting a new job. And then in other segments, we don't just see this in the low barrier to entry jobs. We see this in higher barrier to entry jobs as well. Like, there's just a lot more competition for the same job seeker at this point. And at the same time, you have people saying, well, you know what? My company's been working from home. Everyone that works for me has been working from home. So like, I don't need to go find this person to come into my office anymore. I'm willing to get them wherever they sit, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden, the competition between job seekers on jobs has also shifted quite a bit, whether it's blue collar, white collar, or anything between.
It's really interesting as you start to think about like what will bring people back to work? Because at some point, that's going to be where this conversation shifts, right? Like, right. How do we get people back to work? And I mean, personally, I'm not sure that the answer is to cut off their money. I mean, maybe it is you have to pay more. I remember in the 90s, I'm totally aging myself, but I remember in the 90s, being a technology recruiter, I could name my price, right? Like, this feels to me a lot like the mainstreaming that we've had across some technical and specialty positions in the past. Thoughts on that?
I tend to agree with it. I mean, it's unique in a certain sense, but it's, history repeats itself to a certain extent, right? You have these cyclical things that happen over and over again. And I'd say that the difference here in terms of naming your price is it's not just one sector. It's like everything. Yeah.
Well, and everything. And so I think that puts the low barrier to entry jobs and the entry level workers, I think it puts them in a position to bargain not like any unorganized company has before, right? Like union employees do this as a general thing, right? Yeah. Like the wage creeps up, the benefits get better, the working conditions improve. And I was talking with a bunch of my TA girlfriends on a happy hour, and we were like, this is sort of like the subtle unionization of entry-level jobs. There's risk there. And I think that the pandemic showed a lot of people that they are important and that they could maybe demand a little more.
Yeah, I kind of struggle with that as a concept. I mean, I think that certain companies probably feel that heat and are adding benefits. Others care a lot less and say, I'll just deal with the churn. So, I think it really depends on the company.
And to that end, right? Like, so dealing with the churn is something that, I ran a call center for a few years. Like, we just dealt with the churn. That's just what you did, right? And when that happens, you have to just generate more candidates, which, I mean, for us at Joveo, that presents an opportunity for us to serve our clients better, right? But the reality is when you were paying a price to get a candidate last year, right? Like an average CPA. I mean, the average CPA is how much higher now than it was at this time last year, you think?
Oh gosh, I mean, we see it in certain sectors have doubled, and others a third larger. I mean, it's all over the place, but it's certainly not cheaper any place.
And I think that especially in companies where maybe there's a bigger hierarchy, larger companies, I think that there's this notion that it's like everything's opening back up. Why can't we get people, right? Why is it more expensive? So if you were, I look to you to sort of be my voice of reason for good, practical answers to things, right? That's why I call you my work husband. So in this situation, right? If you were talking to a TA leader, which is a lot of who our audience is, what would be your sort of snippet to give them for their senior leadership on why it's harder to find talent and why it costs more? What would be your elevator pitch?
Gosh, I don't know, because it's when you're in the field, I'm thinking back to my call center, running a call center days at Verizon. And it's like, if I needed help in the field, that wouldn't necessarily trickle its way up to the people in corporate. I know what I would do to combat it if I was kind of pulling the purse strings. I mean, I would invest in employer brand as much as possible. and I would just deal with reducing churn wherever I could. And also you kind of have to just bid into the marketplace. But I would share the stats I just did with them as much as I could and say, hey, here's the benchmarking data that says, look, it's not just us. It's not just company XYZ trying to hire these, call center representatives. It's everyone in the industry is seeing this massive increase in cost per apply and downstream hire and so on. So, I would look towards whatever part of that funnel I could control, which is, like I said, employer brands probably at this point less expensive than ever in terms of your ROI on that, and then pair that with reducing churn once they're actually there. I think that's quite a winning combination at this point.
Yeah, and I'm going to be real, right? Like we both work at Joveo, and one of the reasons that I work at Joveo is in my career, one of the best things that I ever did for the bottom line of my company is invest in programmatic advertising, right? It allows you to put the money that you need in the positions that you need it. And where you were talking about controlling the funnel, the other thing that I would just share with my TA brethren is that the funnel needs to be efficient, and your employment brand will help at every conversion step, right? Like you're going to lose far more to funnel attrition than you're going to do to elimination. You're going to say yes to far less, you're not going to say no to as many people as are going to ghost you. I promise, right? Like that's just how it is.
And we deal with this all the time, right? Like, we see certain people that have longer apply processes and like their click to apply rate is a percentage or two. But then you have other applicant tracking systems or their competitors where it's like you're at 20, 30, 40% click to apply rates. And you know what, if you can make that part of the funnel better, guess what? You're going to see an immense return on investment on that, right? Like that's honestly like where I would attack everything. And then like you talked about the change to programmatic, that's the other thing, right? So we deal with a lot of publishers in our ecosystem. And when times were tough and there wasn't a lot of jobs out there, a lot of publishers were saying, you know what, like I don't have a minimum CPC anymore. Like whatever I can get, I can take. I need more content for my ecosystem to work, right? And then all of a sudden, like now it's the complete opposite. People who used to allow you to bid 15 cents or 20 cents are saying, hey, like I don't want those anymore. Here's my new minimum, right? And we're dealing this with large publishers. We're dealing this with small publishers. I think that they're seeing that the top of the ecosystem is so lucrative that they can just deal with saying, you know what, I'm not in the business of driving wholesale in the manner I used to be, right? And so like when we start thinking about how especially direct employers historically buy, right? Like, and I get it, right? Like it's a, especially on the back end of COVID where, there were layoffs and staff reductions and all of a sudden it's a one-person show dealing with a whole talent acquisition organization. You can't deal with 100 vendors yourself, right? Like you can't go figure out where the best ROI is on each one of these individually. And so like we see certain people that on certain sites end up paying a few bucks a click, $3-5 a click on certain campaigns, where if they just diversified that to however many make sense, they can reduce that cost sometimes by 3x. So, you can reduce that piece and put programmatic to work plus an easier application process. It's pennies on the dollar, even though the auctions are going up. Yeah.
And it also allows you to automate some of the thinking around sponsorship, right? Like if you're just are wise and know what it takes to convert and you do the most to shore up your funnel at every step, can increase your conversion rates, whether that's through your action or through your branding, right? Sometimes it's just about being quick. Like nobody's sitting there waiting for 6 days for a recruiter to call them back at this point, right? Like,
absolutely. And that's why like we encourage our clients to put our pixels on every stage, right? So like somebody gets to your page, somebody clicks, we're already tracking that. Somebody lands on your page, we're tracking that because, there could be long load times or something, right? That somebody gets lost before they even get there. Apply starts, apply finishes. We can pixel every single one of those pages. And if you have a 10-page apply process, you're going to be able to very easily see, hey, wait a second, people are not making it through this, right? They're coming in, they're showing their intent, but they're not making it through, right? And especially right now, that's super important. So, we ask everyone, let's measure everything and figure out where in your funnel we can help optimize.
Let me just tell you, the college Dropdown in Taleo that we used at AT&T was responsible for 70% of our application abandons. It had to have the exact school in there. So if you typed University of Oklahoma instead of whatever else, the University of Oklahoma, it would just give you
You were, by the way, leaning in like you were telling me a secret.
Oh my gosh, because it was like
don't tell anyone.
Okay, well, I'm sure my old team listens to this, so they're totally going to have heard me dime them out. But it was bad, and just by doing away with that, you know, so be very wise and smart on how you configure your application to change your conversion rate.
I see that stuff all the time, by the way. Like you'll see, because I do test applies all the time because I'm insane, and you try typing your phone number wrong, you didn't put the parentheses in, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, and you get stuck. It says, sorry, you got to do this question again. Like, and it's these simple questions where it's like, no, I put my information in. If I was a real job seeker, I'd probably stop right then and there and say, you know what, this job's not for me. In fact, I used to have friends that would tell me, like, not in the space, when they see certain URLs, like, you know, a certain ATS that does not have good conversion rates, as soon as they click on that job, they look at the URL and say, I'm not even applying this.
Not going to bother.
Yeah.
Make it as simple as possible. Well, so that brings me to sort of the next question in this big continuum, right? Like we have all of these people that maybe aren't taking on the traditional job paths as we're used to. And they're getting some stimulus checks. Those are maybe going to start to wind down and maybe they'll get a little less of that. Yep. Like, how do you think the gig economy is going to play into all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And I think that we've seen certain parts of the gig economy kind of halt, right? Like ride sharing, people are not doing that the same way they used to. And in fact, even when I'm on Uber, you know, my Uber app, and I'm looking for a ride, you see fewer drivers out there, right? So like something that used to cost me to, you know, $7 to go down the street or whatever, you know, I'm seeing is $12-$20 and sometimes without being like a surge pricing or anything like that. So there's an imbalance there, but on the other part of the business, like food delivery, I think a lot of people have been flocking to that because look, I can go shop and not really be in contact with anybody and kind of drop it off at somebody's door and move on with my life to the next thing. So I think it's really an important piece of the overall economy. I think the other piece that's pretty interesting with gigs in general is job sites figuring out how gigs fit into their overall ecosystem, right? So like, you know, when I used to run a job site, you know, a few years ago, we'd run explicit email campaigns for certain, you know, promotional gig economy jobs, right? Because we knew, hey, they'd give us a lot per click or per apply downstream, right? But think about that from a job seeker standpoint. They see that so many times, that same offer, so to speak, they get really annoyed by it. They start hitting your spam bucket, you know, they hit the spam button and then you stop getting such good inboxing. So like there's a real balance of how you figure that out, right? And then so one interesting thing that's happened recently, you know, on Indeed, actually, they came out with news that they basically built a separate ecosystem for their gig jobs, right? Because Indeed has really done a really good job over the years of saying, you know, we help people get jobs. Their job is to help make the right match for the right job seeker. And even though a gig job might be the right job for that job seeker, it's not the natural fit for your average job seeker looking for a what and where search in their local area, right? So it's like, where do I put this, right? And so like, I'm not saying that's the wrong move. I'm saying it's made it a lot harder for gig companies to get the same traffic from Indeed that they're used to. And Indeed, let's face it, they have a lot of scale and they convert really well for most companies, right? So that has been another reason that actually gig companies have kind of started kind of flocking to us in a number of different capacities, saying, hey, how can you guys help me out in ways that we have to get more creative than we have in the past?
Yeah, right. Like, because the broad distribution not only helps from a, you know, alternative to the traditional, say, Indeed posting, but it also allows you to control your cost appropriately depending on the number of candidates, right? Like, and I think that, and look at them in non-traditional ways. So I think that all of that is helpful.
Well, it's all of that. And it's also like, all right, look, if I can sponsor every place, you know, what ends up happening with gig companies, right? They have kind of their evergreen areas that are kind of always on, right? They kind of have a repeatable, I need this amount of candidates. And then of course they're opening up new markets all the time, right? So like, especially in new markets, they're saying, how can I get people as fast as possible, right? They're not like traditional HR organizations where it's, look, I have this posting up and I want it for 30 days and, you know, it needs to last over a specific amount of time, right? They're saying, no, like time is money and I need as many people as quickly as possible so that I can get into the status quo type of hiring cycle moving forward, right? And so programmatic's great at that because instead of sending it to one site and hoping that it'll predictably help you with, you know, getting that fast start. You said at every place you're guaranteed a fast start, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people rely on us for that type of tactic as well.
Yeah, and it's super important, right? Because if you look at the overall, like what's happening there, right? Like the need for drivers is going up. So the cost to get those drivers is up like 200 and something %.
Yep.
And then it's like the number of people willing to do that job has probably gone down. So it's like you have both of those in an area where it isn't about qualification, it's about interest.
Right. And it's also, I mean, the other factor here is some of these gig companies have been around for a while at this point, right? It's no longer something I haven't seen before, right? So It's figuring out how can you re-engage with somebody who's already seen something or give them new information that they may not have seen the last time that will actually move them along the funnel. So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. And, and we'll close with this. So although I have a full-time job, I love doing little giggy things, right? Like, and I also think about it like it's all about the time and place. If you hit me up in the middle of the day and I'm working and not, like I'm doing my day job or whatever, I'm much less interested in a gig. And if you get me when I'm sitting there bored with nothing to do, being a couch potato. So
I'm not going to lie. You've actually described the complete opposite of how job seekers actually search for jobs. Because what they do is they look for jobs when they hate their job and are actually looking on their phone because they can't get it on the corporate infra.
I can totally see that, but I don't hate my job, Dan. So I wouldn't do it that way. That's how that works. Oh my gosh. It has been a pleasure as always. I am sure that I will have you back again to talk about something else, but great information about the job market and gig hiring. And I appreciate you. And thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Bye guys.